Good afternoon. I'm Carol Thompson Cole, President and CEO of VPP Raise DC. I'm pleased to welcome you to today's program and introduce our featured guests. While I wish we could all be together for this exciting conversation, I'm hopeful that day will come again soon. For the past 20 years, we have been working to ensure all young people of this region have the tools to succeed in school and beyond, improving educational, health, and career outcomes. VPP and Raise DC has deployed more than $110 million to programs and organizations serving over 50,000 children and young adults in our region annually to yield healthier families, improved academic achievement, and higher graduation rates. Our work began with strengthening individual nonprofits across Greater Washington, which expanded to connecting them into networks. Then we built upon those networks to include cross-sector collaborations with community members, governments, businesses, and the philanthropic community. As we look towards our next 20 years, we decided we need to do more, and we started a conversation with Raise DC, a member of the National Strive Together Network. Raise DC is a collaborative impact initiative that aligns data, partner actions, research, and community voice to shift policies, practices, and mindsets to build equitable systems. VPP and Raise DC joined in April 2020 to address persistent opportunity gaps with the goal of transforming systems, resulting in more equitable outcomes for every young person in our region, regardless of zip code, race, gender identity, or ability. As we celebrate 20 years of creating connections and driving actions that improve life outcomes for youth in Greater Washington, I'd like to recognize and thank our co-founders who are with us today and who continue to invest in our future: Mario Marino, Raul Fernandez, and Senator Warner. I'd also like to thank all of our generous investors, some who have been with us from the beginning. And thank you to everyone who is joining us today. We're grateful to have many of our board members, partners, friends, and guests here. It is important now more than ever to invest today in our youth who will be our leaders of tomorrow. The current pandemic has highlighted and uncovered the many challenges and inequities that young people and their families are facing. As we look toward returning to school after a year of virtual learning, a top priority is to help resolve the learning loss and disconnection as a result of this pandemic. I look forward to today's conversation that will provide insight into the current state of affairs with the COVID-19 response as we build back together. Senator Warner knows firsthand how cross-sector alignment and regional collaboration make us stronger with a greater ability to improve education, healthcare, and career and college outcomes, resulting in broader, deeper, and lasting systemic change. And we are pleased to have him with us here today in conversation with Billy Shore, Chairman of Community Wealth Partners and founder and executive chair of Share Our Strength. Billy has been involved with VPP from the very beginning as a thought partner and one of our first board members. Thanks to both of you for joining us today to launch our 20th anniversary speaker series. With that, I'd like to turn it over to Billy.
Thanks, Carol. Thank you so much. And congratulations, Carol, on an incredible 20 years of achievement. I just love the vision behind the collaboration with Raise DC and just so impressed with everything that you've accomplished. I want to especially thank the investors, as you did, the early co-founders, Mario Marino and Raul Fernandez. And what a treat to have you with us, Senator Warner. You are not only one of the obviously founders of Venture Philanthropy Partners, but a hero to many of us for the approach that you bring to Capitol Hill at a time when our country so needs common sense and problem solving and a commitment to putting country over party. Nobody represents that in the way that you do. And we're really thrilled to have you. I want to use this conversation to get some insights from you on everything from pandemic response to the cross-sector and regional collaboration that Carol talked about, obviously your role as chairman of the Intelligence Committee. But let's start just by getting the scoop on what's going on Capitol Hill right now. And you are in such a pivotal role as one of the members that everybody looks to decide whether something is going to actually be able to get through with Democratic support and or Republican support. You must feel maybe a weight on your shoulders that you haven't felt any other time in you're now in your third term. But paint us a picture of what it's like on Capitol Hill right now.
Billy, thank you. And thanks for all that you do with Community Wealth Ventures and Share Our Strength. Thanks for now close to 40 years of friendship that you and I have had, and commend you for all your great work. Let me also echo what you've already said and give a big shout out to Carol and everybody on the VPP team. I hope viewing today are my original partners, Mario and Raul, and I think Raul and I would both agree that really the original driving force was Mario Moreno, and we commend him, his leadership. And while we get, the three of us get credit for being the three initial investors, I would be remiss if we didn't also put in that co-founder group, Jack Davies, who for so many, many years really bore the burden of continuing to make sure that the VPP got funded. And I think Carol's comments about $100 million into the region is a real tribute to all of the VPP family. So great work, great job. In terms of the mood up here, it's been a wild first 2.5 months. I mean, we came back from the elections. We went into January 6th, a horrifying day, and it will, in my memory, go down along with like 9/11, just in terms of personal, having been on the floor, having seen the insurrectionists, seen the destruction that took place. I'd hoped that there would be more of a kind of coming together in the immediate aftermath of January 6th. Unfortunately, that didn't fully come to pass, and we can get into this. Some of this was still because of, I think, undue influence of some of the Trump supporters. Some of this, candidly, I wish the Biden team, they needed to put together their rescue plan quickly. I wish there would have been a little more buy-in from our Republican friends, and from that matter, from some of the more moderate Democrats. There were a number of things in the plan that if I had written it, it would have been different. On the other hand, the need of additional resources and my personal desire to make sure that President Biden was successful on his first major legislative event, made an easy decision for me to support the package. Again, I wish, looking back to the December package, in which I was intimately involved, where originally a group of us, 4 Democrats, 4 Republicans, got tired of what seemed to be the political posturing around the election in the immediate aftermath. And we said, people are literally starving, as Billy, you know better than I, and we needed to act, and we came together on a $908 billion plan that I think did have that kind of balance, and frankly ended up with 92 votes. Where we go from here, I think there's a lot of uncertainty. There are 20 of us, 10 Democrats, 10 Republicans, that continue to meet on a regular basis to see if we can find some common ground. I think the Congress may shortly move, or at least the Senate may shortly move to some legislation involving China. I think there is an enormous challenge dealing with the Communist Party of China and President Xi Jinping. And I think it is important whenever we talk about China that we make clear, at least from my personal belief, that our beef is with the Communist Party of China and Xi Jinping. It is not with the Chinese people and not with the kind of hateful rhetoric that may have played into the tragedy that took place last week in Atlanta, where we have seen such an upsurge of actions and rhetoric against Asian Americans and Chinese Americans in particular. But I think there is some real consensus around this issue of how we counter the Communist Party of China. We may have some bipartisan activity there. For the most part, most of the Biden appointees have actually gone relatively uneventful. So that I guess is good news. But there is a host of issues from where we look at infrastructure, where I think we all agree there's needs to further issues around racial justice in terms of criminal justice reform, issues around voting rights, which are, I think, some of the most egregious activity that's taking place, for example, in Georgia these days that needs to be put to an end. So there's a lot of points, as obviously, as well as climate change, and I guess the list, we can all go through the list. My hope is that we could put a few more bipartisan points on the board, because a lot of this, as you well know, Billy, when you're talking about trying new initiatives, you got to build that trust, and the trust quotient is fairly low. And I'd almost say that although the Senate looks a lot better than the House, it feels to me like the trust quotient may be non-existent in the House at this point. So I do think it's incumbent upon the Senate to see if we can maybe take the lead in a couple of bipartisan areas, recognizing there will be other areas where, frankly, we're just going to have fundamentally different philosophical positions.
Senator, the conventional wisdom this week is that President Biden might be on the cusp of what's being called everywhere a transformational presidency. It might be a transformational leader. Will that be harder to kind of keep that going for the reasons that you've just described? A lot of folks, it seemed to, feel like they needed to buy into this first package. Is it tougher sledding going forward?
Well, I think the first package, we've now put $5 trillion into COVID relief. And while that has been hard, when you're spending $5 trillion where there were lots of needs and all of it's unpaid for, that's, as you remember from your time on the Hill, Billy, it's, getting people to vote for unpaid spending bills is sometimes a push, but not a hard push. There was more than a little bit of hypocrisy amongst some of my Republican friends who, as if they suddenly woke up and thought, oh my gosh, this last one's unpaid for. Well, the previous four were unpaid for, and President Trump had actually advocated numbers that were bigger than what Biden's proposed. But I do think it's safe to say that some of these issues we just have disagreements on, and on, there may be an ability, for example, on infrastructure, to put it into two packages, where one is more conventional infrastructure, where I think there is greater bipartisan agreement and maybe even some willingness to acknowledge the fiscal responsibility. But I had one of my Republican colleagues say the other day, well, he agrees that we need to deal with infrastructure, but of course you shouldn't ask the Republicans to have to pay for it, which kind of, again, and there's plenty of this kind of behavior on both sides, but it was a little bit of a telling moment. We're all in it together, as long as we don't have to bear into the fiscal burden. But listen, I guess let me just speak personally for a moment, since the VPP family is kind of my extended family in the region. I am, as I enter into my third term, both more excited about this job, more optimistic, feel better about my ability to put points on the board. And, I am not going to default to the cynic's position that we can't ever get bipartisan, or to the notion that that Joe Biden can't be a transformational president because in so many ways, COVID has laid bare so many of the disparities in our country, oftentimes around race, that a year ago we maybe understood, but not in the same level of visceral way, or well, let me say this, that maybe much of the majority population in the country didn't understand in the visceral way. Obviously, people of color have understood this for their whole lives.
Well, let's stay on race for a minute, because I feel like this is an area that intersects so clearly with the priorities of Venture Philanthropy Partners, where we talk a lot about making sure that we create opportunity for boys and young men of color. How do we do that from a policy point of view? There's ways, of course, we're trying to do it from the nonprofit perspective and at the community level. As a legislator at the federal level, when you think about what it's going to take to really address some of these disparities and inequities, what do you think our priorities should be?
Well, Billy, let me start with one that probably is not the top, but it may be one that I have some special insight into, but I do think plays an important macro role. And that is the questions around access to capital in this country. You know, over the last year, we know Black and brown communities have been much harder hit on a healthcare basis. We know that's translated in terms of lack of economic opportunity, in terms of broadband disparity. That's translated into worse healthcare outcomes. This whole litany of race-based items. One area as an entrepreneur that I've focused on is access to capital. We've seen 440,000 Black businesses close. That's a generation of wealth creation. 440,000 of about 2.6 million. So we're talking about a good chunk. We've seen close to a third, the data's a little less clear, on Latino businesses that have potentially gone under. And in many ways, the well-intentioned efforts of Congress to try to shore up small businesses, that was called the PPP program, well-intentioned, but it indirectly played into kind of the inequality in our system, because Black businesses, brown businesses, often who've had to bootstrap themselves into existence, did not have at the same percentage well-established banking relationships. So the only people who got money in the first couple rounds were people who had well-established banking relationships. And that led to some of the spiraling effect that took place. So one of the things I'm proudest of, and one of my key initiatives going forward, is going to be to grapple with this issue. And again, I say from a personal standpoint, because I was doing a Zoom earlier and talking about my background. You know, I was grew up middle class, first person in my family to graduate in college, had student debt, went into business. So you've heard this story from me, Billy. You know, I failed miserably twice, was living out of my car, sleeping on friends' couches, but I got a third try. And the third try ended up being cell phones, and I did very, very well. I am under no illusion that if I had not been a white man with the appropriate educational background, I wouldn't have got a third shot or a second shot, or maybe not even a first shot. And so I've always thought, you know, how can I take the benefits that I've had and make it a little bit equaler in terms of access to capital and access to these kind of entrepreneurial opportunities. In the December bill, something that didn't get much attention, but it was my lead ask, I got $12 billion for investments in Black-owned banks, which were down to only about 22, 23 of them in the country, and community development financial institutions. You're familiar with CDFIs, who by their nature lend into low and moderate income communities. That $12 billion, $3 billion, which will go in grants, $9 billion, which will actually be invested like tier one capital into these institutions that will increase their lending capacity by $90 billion, could be a long-term institutional game changer. And if we can take that public investment, if we can take some of the publicity or kind of good news propaganda that's coming out of the big banks, how they say they want to do more, and really translate that into real, tangible, measurable action. And then look at the corporate community, who again, I think is trying to say they want to offer more opportunities for Black and brown entrepreneurs. There's a chance here to create a holistic approach that can partially take on this issue of access to capital in a fair way. And I think it's important because it doesn't solve all of the challenge, particularly of young Black men, in school or intersections with the criminal justice system. But if there are more successful Black entrepreneurs, male and female, brown entrepreneurs, male and female, with that kind of fair access to capital, I think that helps community building. Think that helps the related issues that we are going to have to grapple with around how we make up for the educational loss over the last year for kids, not just Black and brown, a lot of rural kids as well, who've not had the same kind of, whether access to broadband or distance learning has been more challenged. How do we continue to deal with some of the healthcare disparities? There's a whole host of things, but I would argue, and thanks for giving me the chance to give my comment on this, that this access to capital issue is one that I may have as a entrepreneur who has at least hopefully some awareness that I probably had opportunities that I know I had opportunities that others didn't. And if I can take whatever I've learned in this space to try to correct some of that, I may be able to add some value.
And isn't this also just a classic example of where you are able to find common ground that others have not? This just seems like an issue that everybody can come togetder on.
Well, it was. Thank you. I mean, the amazing thing in this, the reason I got the $12 billion in was because I convinced Steve Mnuchin, Mr. Trump's Treasury Secretary, who ended up becoming a good friend with, and I thought was a good partner on all of these. Got 7 Republican co-sponsors, including Mike Crapo, who then chair the banking committee, because of the idea that if you can, build this kind of entrepreneurial skill and business development opportunity, that's better than just giving a short-term benefit. That wealth creation component, which again, Community Wealth Ventures, you are all about, is an area to find that common ground. And I'm proud of that. But the devil is always one of the differences. Having been a governor and now a senator, the one major difference I understand why I sometimes still like the governor job better is, senators think the business is over once you pass the bill. Governors realize how you get it implemented is really the difference. I'm very, very aware that this program that got passed in the December legislation, and unless it gets implemented correctly and we can leverage it into other activities of leveraging the private sector who maybe wants to do the right thing but needs a little nudge, we're not going to take full advantage of this opportunity.
That's so interesting that you mentioned that now, because one of my current obsessions is this child tax credit that just passed, which is fantastic. But as you said, passing it is half the battle. One of the things we've learned at Share Our Strength in the No Kid Hungry campaign is you might have a program like a child tax credit or school breakfast. That doesn't mean every child and family is going to access it. It's not easy for people. And half the battle then becomes at the state and local level to make sure, and this is a place where I think nonprofits come in a big way as well, to help people make sure that they're aware of and they know how to access these benefits. So I think that, the child tax credit could lift as many as 40% of kids who are in poverty out of poverty, but it's not going to happen just because Congress passed it. We've still got a lot of work to do on that.
Yeah, let me just 100% agree. I mean, my sense, and I look forward to working with you and the whole VPP community on this, is that we passed it, but it's for only 1 year. So, we need to be thinking about the case for renewal, or more importantly, permanency. And the only way we'll make that case is if we minimize, if we take advantage of getting as many families to sign up as possible. And that will mean not just using governmental entities, and getting, the faith community, getting the nonprofit community, candidly, even getting employers to become advocates for it as well. We got to build a broad-based, bipartisan and multi-sector, both endorsement of this, but also implementation plan. And I give a lot of credit to Michael Bennett and Sharon Brown and Bob Casey and others who were the legislative advocates. But I really would hope, I would really hope that we would see a broad-based nonprofit and business and advocacy network that was put together to make sure that this is not just a one-year wonder.
Yeah, I think that becomes our job now. And Senator, you mentioned a moment ago learning loss, and I was going to ask you about, with all of these issues as we're getting kids back to school and as we're trying to figure out how they get back to school, and we know there's issues related to mental health, there's been issues related to digital divide and whether kids have access to the internet at home. How do you think we need to prioritize these as we start to reinvest in kids actually being back in brick and mortar schools? And not all of them will be. Some will continue to learn remotely.
Well, great question. I do think this is an area where if we don't do this well, it will not be a question of lack of resources. I mean, this legislation, extraordinarily generous, $130 billion on K-12, $350 billion state and local. I know Virginia alone, just let me give you some of the Virginia numbers, $2.1 billion to schools, close to $3 billion directly to localities, $4 billion to the state. A lot of that local money and state money, if needed, could be redirected to K-12 as well, because as a former governor, those dollars are a little bit fungible since the state has such a responsibility and the local government has such a responsibility. That's the case in most states. So, we've got a once in a generation opportunity to have the resources to try to get this right. And we've got the flexibility on those resources that they can be spent out over a few years. I know there was a lot of critique saying, well, we've got all this money and you're not gonna be able to spend it, by the end of this school year. Absolutely, we shouldn't spend it by the end of the school year. We're gonna need, some of these things are gonna be capital improvements that will be needed to be made in schools, heating and air conditioning systems and the ability to air purification systems. But a lot of this is gonna have to be fundamental rethinking of summer school. It's going to have to be fundamental rethinking of after school programs. It may mean extended day programs as we get back, as we get kids back into school. One of the things I think we also need to acknowledge, and this will be easy to say, tough to figure out how to implement. I think we've oftentimes focused on those kids who've not done well in a remote setting, either because of lack of broadband or attention issues or questions around parenting at home, whatever. But what I've heard from school board members across Virginia is there is a subset, and not all from well-advantaged families, but there is a subset of students who actually have done much better with remote learning, even from some of our poorest communities. So the idea of some level of more permanent virtual school that might still include, coming in for sports or coming in for other activities, I don't think we can dismiss that idea. So if there's ever a case where, on this one, implementation is going to be is going to have to be the driving force. And I hope we're willing to be experimental. And I think there's a lot of issues here where the nonprofit sector can, has got the models, whether it is that after school program or that extended day program. I know there was some extended day in Massachusetts a while back that I was looking at. I think we got to be try to be enormously creative here. And, many school systems had to be creative at a level that was unprecedented in the last year. We just got to nudge them to keep that creativity going and maybe break some more glass to try to, give the kids the learning environment they most prosper in. Let me also just quickly get another self-serving plug in here. As a former telecom guy, I'm a big believer that broadband's got to be, ubiquitous in both high speed and affordable. In this last bill, we got $17 billion for broadband, 7 of it, which goes through some of the traditional programs like E-rate and Lifeline, but 10 billion of it in very, very flexible dollars that can be states and localities can leverage to whatever way will get the most coverage. And there is even in the local money, in the state money, we broke it into 2 tranches, and the second tranche is also available for broadband infrastructure. So we've not made the commitment we need. We probably need another 40+ billion to finish this out. But what we've done in the last bill will be the biggest federal government broadband commitment, and setting real goals that say we want 97, 98% coverage at speeds that are appropriate and at affordability rates has to be a goal. We have to be very clear about that, because again, with all due respect to my old industry, some of the incumbents are not that anxious about going ahead and building out the kind of capacity that we really need.
I mean, this represents for you just an incredible achievement over many, many years, finally coming to fruition, if it happens the way you've described.
Well, it's taken a lot of effort and a lot of battles. Some of the incumbent programs are pretty well entrenched, and even the E-rate program has done some good things, but I feel like it has been way too school focused, and creating more hotspots so that families have to drive their kid and sit in a school parking lot is not a long-term solution. We need that broadband connectivity to the home, to the wherever the home may be, urban or rural. And again, I think we put a good down payment down, but the battle, the amount of battle that took place in this last bill, not to have all of the money subsumed into the traditional programs, as opposed to where we could make it more flexible and let localities figure out what gets them the most coverage at the best rates, it was a battle, and I can assure you, Billy, it did not break down Democrat, Republican.
In the 20 minutes we have left, I'd love to go both more local and more global. More local, I'd like to take the conversation we're having and put it through the lens of regional cross-sector collaboration, which is so important to venture philanthropy partners. It's how we've always operated, and whether it's education or early childhood or infrastructure, or the commitment we talked about earlier to boys and young men of color, what kind of strategies should we be looking at to improve that kind of regional cross-sector collaboration?
Well, I think there are a number of groups that have been advocating for that. I actually want to give a shout out to the Greater Washington Partnership and our mutual friend Russ Ramsey and Peter Shear and others, where they've looked on a slightly broader regional basis than we traditionally do. It goes all the way from Baltimore to Richmond, and you think about it that way, that's the 3rd biggest economy in our country. And so that's given some kind of business air cover on issues like regional transportation, so that we don't have the bottleneck at Union Station, that we can have the commuter rail systems all kind of seamlessly realize that the Potomac is not this great divide, that we're actually a regional economy. They have also taken some efforts around racial equity. I think it'll be important to make sure that's got some meat on the bones, and that there is greater collaboration. I think we've come a long way as a region. I remember back when I was governor, until I was governor, there had not been a meeting between the two governors of Maryland and Virginia and the mayor of the district for like 15 years, which is kind of wacky, but, and that's got a whole backstory in itself, which, but you know, that those regional sessions are taking place. I think Mayor Bowser and Governor Northam and Mayor Hogan have got everything I see is you know, a good working relationship. I think on the, you know, I think we've got a moment for the whole region and not just Virginia, with Amazon's coming here, and how do we say to Amazon, we need you to step up in a big way. Amazon's a great company. It's not historically had the kind of corporate philanthropy that you know, other companies of its size and stature has had. I've been pushing them, you know, to look at this affordable housing issue on a regional basis. That is something that I think that's terribly important. And again, let me get in one more shameless plug, if I can, and this fits into my whole kind of opportunity notion or access to capital notion. I've got a piece of legislation we're calling Lift Up that would take advantage of our record low interest rates right now. I'm going to actually meet with the chairman of the Federal Reserve on it later today. That says if we are willing to slightly subsidize the interest rates with mortgages currently about 2.75%, if we bring that interest rate down to 1.5% and help cover some of the closing costs, we can create for first generation, first time home buyers. And again, the distinction there being, you know, my kids maybe shouldn't take advantage of this because they can come to my family to get that help on that mortgage. And as you know, Billy, you know, the racial disparity on wealth creation in this country is 10 to 1, white family over black family. A lot of that due to the lack of access to, you know, owning a home. If we can have this Lift Up program in place and create 20-year mortgages instead of 30-year mortgages for first generation, first time home buyers, again, by definition, that will be more people of color, you're going to be able to create for basically the same mortgage payment that you would pay normally, an ability to accumulate wealth in that home at a 2-to-1 ratio over a traditional mortgage. And I don't think there would be a single thing we could do, and wouldn't it be great if the business community helped us on that in the greater Washington region, to say, you know, we're going to create 200,000, you know, first generation home buyers. It wouldn't drive up the cost because the mortgage payments would still be equalized, you know, to a 30-year mortgage. But the numbers are pretty remarkable about what it could do. And wouldn't it be great if this region ended up pushing up the home ownership in a way that was both affordable, that benefited people of color, dealt with the wealth issue. We'd have to pair that, I think, because not everyone is going to be ready right away for home ownership. We're going to have to pair that with construction of new affordable housing and low income housing, which we've not increased our stock virtually anywhere in this country in decades. But if we could take that affordable housing and home ownership issue on a regional basis, that would be a huge, huge win. And I do believe my little Lift Up program here that, again, I'm going to have some broad bipartisan support on, might be a model to get passed, but then to try to get implemented in our region first.
And of course, when you talk about affordable housing, we're not just talking about housing, because the correlation between that and all of the other things we've talked about in terms of early childhood and learning and educational opportunities, that's all impacted by somebody's ability to be able to create and accumulate some wealth for themselves through their housing.
Absolutely right.
Really
You know,
powerful.
that is one area I want to get in. You know, I had some critiques of some of the relief efforts, but this last relief effort recognized that, you know, if we're going to get kids back to school, if we're going to get the economy back reopened, even once we get you know, more people vaccinated, we are going to need additional public support for childcare. And there's a very generous portion here for childcare, because again, as we know from COVID, we've seen a disproportionate impact on people of color, but disproportionate impact on women as well, oftentimes because you don't have childcare for kids at school, or if you don't have childcare because the childcare facilities closed down because they can't social distance, you're not going to be able to be back in the workforce. So that was one of the areas where I think we got things right in the last, frankly, even the last two pieces of legislation.
So Senator, to go global, I know that a big chunk of your time has to be spent on Intelligence Committee work, especially as chair, and as like literally as I'm looking at you on the screen, I'm thinking, oh my gosh, he's carrying around information in his head that the rest of us will never know and never should know. So it really, I mean, it is a serious responsibility, obviously. And I recently got a note from you that I know others got as well, outlining a number of things that you thought were going to be priorities in your role as chairman of the Intelligence Committee. They included rebuilding our agencies, depoliticizing intelligence gathering and communication, rooting out anti-government extremism, and dealing with cybersecurity. What can you tell us that we should know about how the work of the Intelligence Committee is affecting our lives and our region, frankly?
Well, living in the nation's capital, we are more affected by the intelligence community than virtually any region in our country. And candidly, the intelligence community workforce, hundreds of thousands of Americans, pretty much, while they're around the country and around the world, they're disproportionately live in our region. We have the whole group of alphabet agencies that live in Virginia, Maryland district disproportionately, and a lot of the classified contracting community lives close by as well. So their success plays into our region's success. They also are, for the most part, extremely good, well-paying and high knowledge-based jobs. So important for the region. It's one of the reasons why I think certain agencies like the CIA and the NSA did a good job under then President Trump, keeping their workforce out of the line of fire of the previous administration, because there were efforts to politicize the intelligence product. I've been very clear to President Biden's, I'm a supporter of President Biden, but nothing will cost me my support of Biden more than if we were to see the intelligence product try to get politicized. And I have told any of the intelligence leaders that he's appointed, your job is to speak truth to power, even if the White House doesn't want to hear it, even if I don't want to hear it, you got to tell the truth. I think it will play, the issue of dealing with misinformation and disinformation in a extraordinarily complicated world, where that misinformation, disinformation can lead to the kind of tragedy that we saw on January 6th, is an extraordinarily important issue. And earlier Zoom I did today was on legislation I've got to try to grapple with what's called Section 230. That was something put in place in the 90s that has been now transformed into a kind of get out of jail free card for Facebook, Google, Twitter, and the large social media platforms to bear no responsibility about any of their content, even if that content violates civil rights laws or takes the form of paid advertising that's advancing financial scams. I think we have to grapple with that. I also think we have to acknowledge that we live in a world right now where the security of all of our institutions is under constant assault from a cyber standpoint. This so-called SolarWinds hack, perpetrated by a foreign power, got into 18,000 companies. Thank goodness the bad guys only decided to steal information from a small number of those companies or government agencies, but nothing, the nature of this attack, they could have turned that into what's called the denial of service. They could have turned off our economy or stopped things in place in a way that would be disruptive beyond anything we could possibly imagine. And I think we have to, we've been saying this for a while, But the reality of that threat is something that keeps me up all the time. And then finally, back on the issue of China, China has put forward an economic model, I call it kind of authoritarian capitalism, whereby they allow domestic competition in new technology areas until a Chinese champion emerges, and then that Chinese champion gets basically unlimited financing. I like to argue that the Chinese Communist Party has taken the best lessons of British imperialism and American imperialism and turned it into their very own 21st century Chinese model. And that model of technology domination allows them, whether it's to take the Uyghurs in China or cut back on the democracy movement in Hong Kong, when they then have that company take their technology leadership around, the sale to authoritarian governments around the world is, hey, buy our stuff, but also this is a great way for you to monitor all of your potential anti-government adversaries in your respective country. That's a pretty attractive deal to a lot of regimes around the world. And I would argue that and I see this in what's called 5G, one of the telecom areas, and I'll stop myself because I can get going on this too long, but we have grown up in a world almost post-Sputnik where virtually every technological innovation was either invented in America. If it wasn't invented in America, we got to set the rules. And oftentimes by setting the rules, the procedures, the protocols, we oftentimes could put our values in, oftentimes transparency, some level of respect for human rights. China is now both contesting us on a technology basis, not just in 5G, but artificial intelligence, quantum computing, biometrics, facial recognition, but they're also trying to set the rules for all of these new technologies that are often anti-democratic and anti-transparent. So this is again an area where I think there's potential for collaboration. We're going to have, I've got legislation bipartisan that would create, in a sense, an alliance of the willing, technology leaders from democracies around the world that can collaborate on some of these cutting edge technologies to make sure that values around transparency and, for example, human rights are reflected even in the technical standards. And it's going to require our government in some of these areas to kind of invest levels of capital to stay competitive. I mean, Huawei in the 5G area, they got a $100 billion backstop. And we don't even have, there's not even an American competitor. There are a couple European and one Asian competitor. In the question of semiconductors, China's investing $150 billion. We've gone from about 30% of the world's production of semiconductors down to about 9%. We're on the path to 9%. China's done the exact opposite. So, this is going to take a capital investment. It's going to take a investment in technology and R&D. It's going to take a strong intelligence community. And again, bringing it from global to regional, we've got the policymakers and the intel folks around here with Amazon's presence, with the new Virginia Tech Innovation Campus, with the great work done at University of Maryland. We have the chance to be the region that will work on these cutting edge technologies and hopefully leverage other tech companies to come here. But boy, oh boy, and this gets back to where VPP has got to play a role. As all of these enterprises come in, we attract this attention. We've got to bear in mind equity and fairness and how we engage with the nonprofit community so that we welcome folks to the region, but with that welcome comes some level of hopefully expected social responsibility to make sure that we got a region that really reflects the best of our country.
One more question about the intelligence community, and you talked about the need for a strong intelligence community. There were times during the previous administration where I was, like a lot of people, really worried that our intelligence community was going to be decimated, hollowed out, demoralized. You suggested a few moments ago, hopefully, and I hope you're right, that politically that the intelligence community is resilient, that they've kind of weathered this storm. Is your assessment that that's going to be okay?
Well, there were areas like the Director of National Intelligence Operations, which ended up with a couple of political appointees that had no business being Director of National Intelligence, that really took it hard. But General Nakasone out of the NSA, I think did a great job. Gina Haspel, who who's the director of the CIA. I think they did as good a job as possible, and continue to do good jobs, although we've got a new director of CIA in Bill Burns, a great guy. But they've got to have, the intelligence community has got to recognize that their oversight committees, and we've tried, one of the reasons why I've been so proud to keep the Senate Intelligence Committee so bipartisan, that we're going to have their back and we're going to stand up for their independence, because nothing would be you think about all the bad things that potentially are confronting our country. I can't think of something that would be worse than to have our intelligence cooked in a way where we were not looking at things with the appropriate seriousness. I mean, I think in many ways we did not look at anti-government extremism and domestic violent extremism with the level of rigor that we should have. This problem didn't start with January 6th. It didn't start with Donald Trump, but our unwillingness to focus on it until after Mr. Trump was out of the White House, hopefully we will get it back to the level of focus that it deserves, because we see these anti-government extremist movements take place in countries around the world from both left and right, and we just need to treat it with the appropriate level of seriousness.
Senator, we've only got a couple minutes left. Two quick things. Is it safe to say that you're the first chair of the Senate Intelligence Committee that ever during a pandemic went viral doing a tuna melt cooking lesson? And will there be more of those?
Well, Billy, I will acknowledge, and for those of you who don't know what he's talking about, just Google Mark Warner tuna melt, where I did reveal my absolutely secret sauce recipe, and that is now locked away in a safe in Langley at some point. But I would just advise, for those who want to try that at home, do not put as much mayonnaise as I did on that tuna melt.
And last thing for you, Senator, we're always coming to you in one form or another, asking for help on policy, and you've been an incredibly generous supporter of Venture Philanthropy Partners. What do you ask of us at Venture Philanthropy Partners and our very generous investors? What do we need to be doing for you and need to be doing better?
Well, what I ask of you is, one, continued involvement with VPP. I think it is one of the most creative models in the whole country, and you do good work. Two, to make sure that as you see examples of what work, that you bring it to us as policymakers, and a lot of this in terms of how we deal with the education gap. And three, I would welcome any of you, and please contact me. I'm easy to find if you're interested in this, working with me on either this access to capital issue for people of color in this country, or if you're interested in this notion of how we can grapple with the wealth gap in terms of property valuations in this Lift Up program. I'd love to have your ideas and help. And as final point, just that remember, none of these programs are done once the bill is signed by the president. It really is only the starting point. And the child tax credit also ought to be one of those things that we find a collaboration to work on together.
Fabulous. Senator, we've all enjoyed this conversation so much. Thank you for your time. Just thank you for your support and your leadership. We look to you on Capitol Hill. I sleep a lot better knowing that you're chairman of the Intelligence Committee, I'll tell you that. Thank you. And now let me turn it over to Venture Philanthropy Partners, Chuck Redmond.
Good afternoon. I'm Chuck Redmond, Vice President of Finance and Operations at VPP Raise DC. First, I'd like to thank Senator Warner and Billy Shore for joining us today and sharing their wonderful insights on these critical issues that are challenges for all of us, but are particularly important for the children, youth, and families we serve in Greater Washington. I especially appreciate your comments, as Billy just mentioned, on the opportunities coming from recent federal legislation to the region, but the importance of collaborating with a network of local partners to capitalize on those opportunities and deliver real outcomes for individuals on the ground. I think this conversation was a perfect way to kick off our speaker series, celebrating the past, present, and future of VPP Raise DC. For 20 years now, VPP Raise DC has been committed to investing our time, efforts, financial resources, relationships, and expertise to amplify the efforts of nonprofits, community-based organizations, and our public and private sector partners doing the critical work of improving outcomes for youth in Greater Washington. Over those 20 years, as was mentioned, we've raised and deployed over $110 million, helping dozens of nonprofits expand their programs across the region, serving tens of thousands of young people through collaborative nonprofit networks, and partnering with local business and government to improve the systems serving youth ages 0 to 24 in Greater Washington. As we move into the next era of VPP Raise DC, we're doubling down on those strategies that have worked for us, expanding our commitment to the regional partnership by integrating with Raise DC and joining the Strive Together national network, and continuing to build the much needed capacity for organizations serving youth in our region. As Carol mentioned in her opening remarks, it's important more than ever to invest today in our youth who will be the leaders of tomorrow. The effects of COVID-19 related shutdowns have resulted in an estimated 200,000 young people being disconnected from formal academic instruction or the workforce. It's an estimated 25% increase over pre-pandemic numbers. To combat this, VPP Raise DC strives to ensure that every young person in the region has access to quality education, healthcare, and college and career training. But we can't do this alone. We must work collaboratively with all of you as we identify opportunities to positively impact the lives of youth, align stakeholders to take action against those opportunities, and continue to build the capacity needed to serve the needs of all of our youth. Our co-founders, as you've heard, have recommitted to the support of this strategic direction, and new investors are joining us for this next exciting chapter in our history. We look forward to engaging all of you as well in the effort to improve life outcomes for youth in our region. We hope that you'll join us as we continue this speaker series, bringing together leaders to share insights on critical issues and highlighting what we've done, where we're going, and how you can all join us. Stay tuned for more information on our mid-May speaker series presentation and engaging panel discussion highlighting Youth Connect, our place-based collaborative network of nonprofits serving youth ages 14 to 24 to improve health, education, and career outcomes. You can learn more about VPP Raise DC's history, our partners, and upcoming events at our website, vppartners.org, or by reaching out to us directly. Thank you again to Senator Warner and Billy Shore, and thank you to all of our investors and partners whose support made this event and our work to create brighter futures for children and youth in our region possible. On behalf of VPP Raise DC, thank you all for joining us today, and I'm looking forward to seeing what we can accomplish together in the future.